welcome to the Christ Anglican Church Adult Education Program for the spring of 2012. We are making a survey of the Old Testament and seeing the Old Testament through the prism of the New Testament, examining different aspects of God's revelation of Himself in the Old Testament, perfectly fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ.
Well, following along with the series of topics that Father Dart had outlined, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about God as King. I will apologize to begin with. I don't have the handouts ready, but come next week, and God willing, you can get two pages rather than just one. For us, the concept of kingship is a somewhat difficult one. One, because of course we live in a republic and not in a monarchy of any of the varieties of monarchies that there have been. And furthermore, there isn't just a single idea of kingship. There are many different traditions. Our own Northern European tradition is rather different from the Middle Eastern tradition of kingship and quite different from the Old Testament. So there are just lots of problems when we begin to think about God as King. And I thought I'd begin with a passage from 1 Samuel. The children of Israel, after they came to the promised land, had been ruled by rulers who came from time to time when there was a problem. The judges who would be there to settle disputes, but they also would be military leaders when the children of Israel were under dominion of their neighbors. But it wasn't a constant thing. You got together an army, you defeated the oppressors, and then everybody went back to their own place. And the judge had no more authority except when people came to consult or had an argument. But in any event, the children of Israel sort of decide that, well, we'd like to be like all of the countries around us. Everybody else has a king, and here we are just, sort of poor neighbors with a kind of ad hoc administration. We don't have a glorious king. And so they come to Samuel and say they want a king. And Samuel speaks to the children of Israel. This is in 1 Samuel 8, beginning verse 10. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking a king from him. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. He will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take your men servants and maid servants and the best of your cattle and your asses and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel, and they said, "No, but we will have a king over us, that we may be like all the nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." Well, that description of kingship, the king is essentially lording it over the people, taking the best of everything, is a fairly accurate description of kingship in the Middle East, certainly from its beginnings in Ur, the Third Dynasty, somewhere before 2000, around 2000 BC on. This was the kings ruled essentially for their pleasure. And as we'll see, that isn't the way the king is supposed to be in Israel. However, the words of Samuel came true. They had a large number of kings who were busy trying to outdo their neighbors in showing their might and their power, and that everybody in the kingdom existed for their glory. And let me read you a little incident from 1 Kings. Familiar story, 1 Kings 21. There was an incident involving a vineyard belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. The vineyard was in Jezreel, close to the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. And Ahab said to Naboth, "Let me have your vineyard to use for a vegetable garden, since it's so close to my palace. In exchange, I'll give you a better vineyard, or if you prefer, I'll pay you whatever it's worth." But Naboth replied, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers." So Ahab went home sullen and angry, because Naboth the Jezreelite had said, "I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers." He lay on his bed sulking and refused to eat. His wife, Jezebel, came in and asked him, "Why are you so sullen? Why won't you eat?" He answered her, "Because I said to Naboth the Jezreelite, 'Sell me your vineyard, or if you prefer, I'll give you another vineyard in its place.' But he said, 'I will not give you my vineyard.' Jezebel, his wife, said, 'Is this how you act as king over Israel? Get up and eat. Cheer up. I'll get you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite.' So she wrote letters in Ahab's name, placed a seal on them, and sent them to the elders and nobles that lived in Naboth's city with him. In these letters she wrote, 'Proclaim a day of fasting and seat Naboth in a prominent place among the people. But seat 2 scoundrels opposite him, and have them testify that he has cursed both God and the king. Then take him out and stone him to death.' So the elders and nobles who lived in Naboth's city did as Jezebel directed in the letters she had written to them. They proclaimed a feast, seated Naboth in a prominent place among the people. Then 2 scoundrels came and sat opposite him and brought charges against Naboth before the people. So they took him outside the city and stoned him to death. Then they sent word to Jezebel, 'Naboth has been stoned and is dead.' As soon as Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned to death, she said to Ahab, 'Get up and take possession of the vineyard of both the Jezreelite. Take possession of the vineyard of both the Jezreelite that he refused to sell you. He is no longer alive, but dead.' When Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, he got up, went down, and took possession of Naboth's vineyard." Well, typical sort of eminent domain, shall we say, being exercised by, he just wanted it and couldn't get it, and Jezebel, being the daughter of one of the kings in the surrounding area, knew how kings were supposed to behave. Somebody tells you they won't do what you want, you take care of the matter. Well, instead, once Israel had become a kingdom, David, who was the second king of the United Kingdom, had been a shepherd before he became king. And with David, there was the understanding that the king was to be a shepherd to his people. Not the people didn't exist for the sake of the king's glory, but the king was there to both nurture the flock. I mean, after all, a shepherd doesn't just simply tell the sheep, "Well, go get some food, hope everything goes fine. Just go out there and find something." No, shepherds Sheep are, I'm told, not the brightest of domestic animals, but they sure can eat. They do a good job of cleaning the area, but you have to lead them to where green pastures, beside not roiling waters, but calm waters so they can drink. That's what the shepherd does to his flock. He also protects the flock against things that would hurt them, against prowling predators. That's why the shepherd has that rather strong staff. It's not simply to help his walking over rough terrain, but it provides a very handy weapon to take care of wolves, other animals that would prey on the flock. And so with David, the idea became for Israel not to have a king like the surrounding kings, but there should be a king who is a shepherd to his people. Now, I know you've already had a lesson on the Good Shepherd, but let me read you a passage that may not be familiar, although there is a wonderful musical setting of it. These are from the last words of David. The oracle of David, the son of Jesse, the oracle of the man who was raised on high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, the sweet psalmist of Israel. The God of Israel has spoken, the rock of Israel has said to me, when one rules justly over men, ruling in the fear of God, he dawns on them like the morning light, like the sun shining forth upon a cloudless morning, like rain that makes the grass to sprout from the earth. Well, this is, not at all a description of Ahab or the neighboring kings, but the description of God as the ruler of his people, caring for them, taking care of them. And this is what is taken over then in the New Testament, that the figure of Christ the King is not Christ the ruler for whose glory everything else exists. We're told that the church is the bride. The bride comes to the king in beauteous garments. And this is a king who rules in righteousness, who defends the rights of the poor. It may not have been clear in the story of Ahab and Naboth and Jezebel. By the way, there are a large number of revisionists who want to make Jezebel into a heroine now. They think that she's been treated very badly in the Bible, and she really was an emissary from a higher culture trying to bring her culture and tradition to these backwards people. If this is the sort of thing she did, we could live without that sort of high culture, thank you. But the point is that in ancient Israel, the land was hereditary, and it was, you held it from your fathers all the way back to the division of the land after the conquest of Canaan, and you passed it on to the next generation. It wasn't like we think, say, in our own society, where land is something that you sell back and forth and try. I mean, that was Ahab's thing. Hey, look, give you a better vineyard or pay you money for it. Well, let's just, there's nothing special about this land except it happens to be where I want to plant a garden. But it was the patrimony, the heritage. Each of families in ancient Israel, that was their, and you were dishonoring your whole family tradition if you just simply said, oh sure, that's a better vineyard, let's swap. No, you can't do that. So Ahab's action was not just simply dirty politics. That would have been bad enough. But it was a primary violation of the traditional code of behavior for the children of Israel. And rather, there is to be a king ruling in righteousness, ruling with justice and mercy together, which make up the righteousness. And it's not a harsh legalism, but it is a concern for the individuals and for maintaining the fabric of society. And that's what the king enforces. And this is why he doesn't go beyond bounds himself, but he also makes sure that the ancient landmarks aren't removed, that the widows are taken care of, that the rights of orphans are protected, that there is justice. Isaiah repeats that twice in the verse. Justice shalt thou pursue. The rabbinic tradition questioned, why justice? Why does he repeat it? Why doesn't he say, pursue justice? No. Justice for us and justice for the stranger. There must be. We have, in our legal tradition, there's justice and there's equity. When enforcing the law would result in clearly a wrongdoing. I remember this story of, I forget where it was, but growing up there was this elderly woman, almost blind, who went to mail a letter in the post box, back when they used to have mailboxes out. Unfortunately, the mailbox was right next to the neighborhood fire alarm, and she thought she was opening the mailbox to pull the fire alarm. And the judge said, well, you turned in a false alarm. Sorry, that's so many days in jail, and sent her off to jail. And no, wait a minute. Yes, that's the letter of the law, but our tradition says that when you follow the letter of the law and it results in something that is clearly not intended, then there's equity. You should have a court that can overrule the letter of the law, appeal finally to the king's justice. But in ancient Israel, the idea was that the king, as shepherd of the people, took care of the people and protected against their enemies. And so David becomes the great model king. As you all know, unfortunately, David didn't always live up to that reputation. He did follow the behavior of neighboring kings in one notorious incident, but we won't go into that. When we turn to how this is taken care of in the New Testament, we see Christ as the shepherd and Christ as the king, and these tend to be seen a little separately, because by this time, with the vanishing, the ancient Israel had not been an independent kingdom for 500 years or so, and this idea of the king as ruler, when you've got Herod as the ruler, it's hard to think of the king of Israel or of Judah being a shepherd king. Herod was certainly at least what Samuel described him as being. So in the New Testament, these two become just a little separate. But remember when Pilate asks our Lord, "Are you a king?" And Christ says, My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my followers would fight for me. My kingdom is not of this world. I think too many people take this as being, well, you know, it's a pie in the sky sort of thing. That we've got this world and then we've got heaven, and not much connection between the two. Not at all. In St. John's Gospel, the world means the state of the individual heart, the person, society, that's under sin and evil. And Christ says, my kingdom isn't that sort of thing where people are, you know, striving to get everything they can, and you've got a little power, you use that power to take as much as you can. No, that's not my kingdom. If I, your Lord and Master, serve you, this is how you should serve your brethren. It's taking that concept of the shepherd king and bringing it into prominence. The king is the servant, the shepherd who protects, who nurtures his flock. And so we have that theme of this transformation of kingship in ancient Israel re-established. You see, this is well, let me just perhaps be a little blunt. Following the demands of Christ, clergy have this unfortunate duty of being available to their flock. By the way, that's prayer book language, biblical language. They have to be on duty 24/7. It's one of the hard things we have communicating to people who come from other places to this parish. They're used to the idea that the minister is only available during office hours and by prior appointment. And getting them to understand that no, if there's an urgent problem, call, you know, and someone will be there. Now, this should not be seen as the clergy have to be available 24/7 to help people. Thank God it's not me. Not quite that. We are to follow the example of the Shepherd King, all of us, to help one another, to look out for one another, to be available. There's, not from this area, but there's one elderly woman I know. She's, I think, well, I guess I shouldn't say that elderly. She's only in her 80s, you know, just youngin'. But she was one of these good people in the small town that always showed up with the casserole when there was a need, you know. Sort of this custom, at least in the South, of whenever anybody dies, everybody brings a casserole to help take care of all the people who will be dropping in to console. And she was, you know, she was always helping out in whatever way she could. And for the first time in her life, when she was in her 80s, she had a sort of mild heart attack and had to be taken, actually flown finally to a regional hospital. And she just could not believe, we were talking, we said, you know, all of these people, they're just coming and trying to do everything to help me and taking care of things, making sure that everything's taken care of around the house. I can't understand this. Why is it the whole town seems to be, you know, just pitching in and helping? And my wife and I had to say to her, well, you know, dear, this is how you're thought of in the community. You have always been there for everybody. And now they've learned from you how you're supposed to behave when somebody's in need. So that takes care of the one part of the king, the shepherd king who nurtures his flock, who's always there. And then there is the other thing. From the 19th chapter of the Revelation of St. John, the Divine. Then saw I heaven opened, and behold a white horse. He who sat upon it is called Faithful and True. Faithful and true. That echo again. And in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes are like a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems. And he has a name inscribed which no one knows but himself. He is clad in a robe sprinkled with blood, and the name by which he is called is the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, followed him on white horses. From his mouth issues a sharp sword with which to smite the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. He will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God the Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh he has a name inscribed, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And there we see, this is with the final battle, the fall of evil, fall of the pagan forces opposing Christ. So yes, the king is a mighty warrior against those who oppose righteousness. Not a mighty warrior who sends out to, recruit. Well, let's see, you've got 5 sons, you've got so many daughters, you've got so many maidservants, manservants, cows, goats, sheep. Yes, we'll take the following. No. But to those who martyr the innocent, the force of Babylon the Great, as it's called in the Apocalypse. And the king, yes, God is a mighty king. But go back to that psalm that we read. We'll praise thy name forever and ever. The eyes of all wait upon thee, O Lord, and thou givest them their meat in due season. That's not the bad sort of king. That's the king, the shepherd king, the nurturing shepherd.